Now, I can tell you from personal experience that when you're about to enter the clouds and at the same time you're trying to figure out how to get from the en route structure to a place where you can begin the approach, well, things can get very confusing. Now, the problem is instrument approaches often don't start directly from an airway or en route nav aid. In that case, you need to figure out how to get from that en route structure to a point where you can begin the approach. And there are several ways this might happen. First, you might get a routing in your clearance that will take you directly from an airway fix to the nav aid used for the approach. For example, the route in your clearance to, say, Independence, Kansas might have ended something like this: Victor 190, Oswego, Jeffy, direct. Now, if you take a look at the chart, what you find is Oswego is the nearest VOR on Victor 190 to Independence, and Jeffy is the radio beacon used for the NDB approach to Independence Airport. Now, that would get you there and take care of it easily. Next, another way you could get from the en route structure to the approach is ATC could guide you there with radar vectors. In fact, you'll find many areas where approach control will almost always give you vectors to the final approach course. It does bypass some of the published approach procedure, but it helps to maintain an efficient traffic flow. Now, another way to get from the en route structure to an instrument approach is to fly a star. And we ain't talking no Broadway or Hollywood star here, because STAR is an acronym for Standard Terminal Arrival Route. And a star picks you up on the en route portion of your flight and sets you up for the approach. Now, like DP, stars simplify clearance delivery procedures. They shorten up radio communications since the details are published right here, and ATC does not have to read them to you in your clearance. Now, where will you meet a star? Well, just as you're more likely to meet a star on the silver screen on Rodeo Drive, you're a lot more likely to find standard terminal arrival routes in the places where a lot of big jets hang out. So you'll find stars published for all of the busy terminal areas. Now, most of these routes are primarily designed for transitioning air carrier jets from the high altitude route structure down to the approach. So even if you're flying into one of these areas where stars abound, you might not get starstruck for your routing. But don't ignore stars, because there are plenty of areas where ATC assigns stars to non-jet airplanes flying at lower altitudes. So let's go stargazing and discover what you can expect when you meet one. Now, if you're using NOS charts, you'll find the stars towards the front of each approach chart book, organized alphabetically in the section where the page numbers start with a P. And by the way, these stars are filed alphabetically by star name, not by airport name. Now, when you're flying, the abbreviated term ATC uses to refer to a star is arrival. So if you were getting a star into, say, Kansas City, the controller might assign you the Jayhawk 2 arrival. Now, all stars are published with a graphic of the route and then textual descriptions of the transitions. These are word descriptions. And these textual descriptions for a particular star may be on a second page if the graphic is pretty cluttered. Now, on a JEP chart, when a star is cluttered, they make the page larger and fold it to keep all the information on one side. Now, the NOS stars also tell you in the word or textual description which approach to expect. And the NOS charts list a few helpful communication frequencies. By the way, they don't always list the same frequencies, but you'll usually see approach control and ATIS and so on. Now, Jeppesen files the star with the approach chart for the airport, and they only list the ATIS because all of the other frequencies you'll see on the approach chart itself. But make sure that you read all of the notes before you start flying a star. For instance, this note tells you that DME is required for this star. You could use either DME or an IFR-approved GPS, but it is important to know about this requirement before you attempt to fly the star. Well, now let's take a close-up look at a star, and in this particular case, you won't even need a telescope to do it. Well, first of all, just like a DP, the ATC code for a star is printed right along with the title. So here's the title, here's the ATC code. Now this one is the Fernando 5. Kind of sounds like a 60s rock band, doesn't it? Well, the ATC code for Fernando 5 is FIM.FERN5. That stands for Fernando 5. So that's what you'd enter in your flight plan if you actually wanted to fly the Fernando 5 arrival. Now again, if you're using DUS to file your flight plan, you may need to use a space up here instead of the period in order to get the computer to accept it. And just like on DPs, the number on the arrival is increased whenever they make a change. And that number is always included in the clearance to make sure that you're flying the latest procedure. Now, when you look at the star itself, you'll find that there can be 3 different thicknesses of arrows. For instance, these heavy black arrows define the basic arrival routes. Here, the basic arrival routes depart Fillmore Vortac in 3 different directions depending on which airport and which approach you'll be using. One goes, for instance, to Umber, one goes to the Van Nuys, VOR, DME down here, and one goes to Tokes intersection. The medium arrows are used for transitions. In this case, you'll notice that there are several transitions that feed into the basic arrival. For example, here's the Ojai transition. Now, you file the transitions by the code given in the textual description. In this case, it's the Ojai.Fern5. Now, finally, the thin arrows show the radials which are used to define intersections. Here you have the 311 radial, happens to be from Ventura, that defines the Ojai intersection. Now, sometimes these radial arrows are very easy to confuse with these transition arrows. But if the arrow only has an R for radial versus the 3 things you need to fly a transition route, then that is just for defining the intersection. Now, in many cases, the star routes look just like an en route chart. They contain courses and distances and MEAs. For instance, here's the MEA between Avenal Vortac and Ray's intersection, and it's 11,000 feet. Now, just like the en route charts, this MEA guarantees you obstruction clearance and navigation coverage. Now, being cleared for a star in itself does not clear you for the altitudes printed on it. If ATC tells you, for instance, cleared for the boiler to arrival, they mean that you are to fly the route as published, but they want you to maintain your last assigned altitude. In this case, ATC will specifically assign you a lower altitude further into the route. On the other hand, ATC may say instead, cleared Fernando 5 arrival, descend and maintain 1000. Again, ATC will assign you altitudes as you proceed. Now, sometimes you'll see an expected altitude on a star, like this one here at Canyon intersection. It says expect to cross at 9,000 MSL. Well, this information is for your planning, but it does not authorize you to descend to 9,000 without specific clearance to that altitude. Now, on the other hand, you may be given an arrival like the Civet 4 arrival, and the Civet 4 arrival is different in that it has built right into the arrival hard altitudes. In this case, ATC would say to you, descend via the Civet 4 arrival. This time, ATC expects you to comply with the altitudes put on the chart because they told you to descend via the arrival. Now, you'll notice that the wording on the altitudes here is different too because you don't see the word expect anywhere. In this case, you'd cross Civet intersection at or below 17,000 feet and at or above 14,000 feet. And you'd cross Bremer at or above 12,000 feet and so on all the way down. Now, there are some other restrictions that ATC needs you to comply with unless they specifically say otherwise. For instance, here on the Fernando 5 arrival, they want you to cross Bale intersection at 250 knots unless they give you a different speed. Now, I, for one, would not want to be the test pilot who tries to do that in a Skyhawk. Well, just like departure procedure, stars can be assigned by the controller even if you didn't file one in your flight plan. And to accept a star, you must have an approved copy of the chart in your possession. So if you don't want to use a published star or don't have a current copy in the cockpit, just put no star in the remarks section of your flight plan. Now, you'll find these stars are very handy because it's a lot easier and quicker to copy down just the title of the star rather than the full route description. So I wish you happy stargazing.